This is Denise Evans with Butler Evans Real Estate, and the topic of this video is bogus or fraudulent emotional support animal letters presented by tenants to landlords. Who is Butler Evans Real Estate? It's me, Denise Evans, JD, and qualifying broker. I've been involved in commercial and investment real estate for over 25 years, first as a Texas litigation attorney, and then as an Alabama investor, developer, broker, consultant, University of Alabama clinical professor in real estate, owner of Butler Evans Education, and nationally published author. We offer buyer and seller brokerage services for investors and business owners in Tuscaloosa and in Birmingham. We also provide statewide consulting services regarding optimizing sales prices, increasing real estate revenues, loan and investor presentations, site selection, short sale negotiations, and other matters. Well, to start with, what is an ESA letter? An ESA, Emotional Support Animal Letter, is a reasonable accommodation request under the fair housing laws for the landlord to waive its no pets rule or its additional charges for pets pricing policy for someone who has a disability and needs an emotional support animal to assist with that disability. It must be reasonable, and it is a request, meaning the landlord is allowed to attach some requirements, and that's what we will discuss here. I need to warn you that some ESA letters are in fact legitimate. You should allow for that possibility in your thinking and planning. It is the law that if someone has a disability and has a legitimate ESA letter and the particular animal under the circumstances is reasonable, you must allow it unless you come under one of the exceptions to the fair housing laws. You can push back regarding the person who wrote the letter, but you cannot ask for any information of the tenant or the letter writer about the specific disability or ask for proof that somebody has a disability. You can question the credentials of the person who wrote the letter and that person's adherence to the ethics and guidelines of their licensing bodies. And I'll tell you how you do that. First of all, I went online and took one of the online questionnaires with one of the internet sources to see if I might qualify for an ESA letter. They asked me within the past 2 weeks if I experienced stress. Often, yes, often. Sadness, sometimes. Sometimes I'm sad that, I don't know, that none of my tomato plants produce tomatoes. That's a little sadness, but I was a little sad. Anxiety, sometimes. Impulsive behavior, never. You don't know me. Suicidal thoughts, never. Inability to sleep, never. Feelings of loneliness, never. Those were my responses. And at the end, it said, congratulations, I have qualified for an ESA letter. It was that simple. So obviously these things are just a con. So here's what the experts say about ESA letters. The APA Practice Organization says regarding a psychologist's role in providing letters for emotional support animals, remember, your letter is stating that the patient's diagnosis substantially impacts a life activity. Can you honestly and objectively make that determination? Does an emotional support animal truly minimize the impact of the patient's problem, or is it just a way of allowing a beloved pet to be able to live with your patient? These are ethical questions that people who have licenses have to adhere to these ethical guidelines. The California Board of Behavioral Sciences reviewed a case where a licensed marriage and family therapist issued an ESA letter to an out-of-state client based on the client's responses to an internet questionnaire. The client's landlord filed a complaint. The California Board of Behavioral Sciences disciplined that therapist for writing an emotional support letter without first conducting a proper assessment. This was an article by Dr. Ben Caldwell from October 14th, 2019. Jeffrey N. Youngren, PhD, has written extensively on this topic. And he says determining that someone has a disability that would justify an emotional support animal is almost always complex and requires records review, consultation with the treating professional, in other words, the one who made the diagnosis, interviews, and possible psychological testing. It is not easy and it is time-consuming. The person who wants the ESA letter must have a DSM diagnosis. They have to be significantly impaired by that disorder or problem, and the presence of the animal must have a significant impact on their disorder or problem, so that without the animal, the person cannot adequately function. That's a high hurdle to meet when you're writing these letters. So bottom line, don't be afraid to ask for proof that the person who wrote the letter has the experience and training to make such a determination. Don't be afraid to ask for total time spent in the person who wrote the letter. Ask them total time spent in assessment and evaluation of the person and the animal. You can't come to a conclusion that an animal is necessary as an ESA unless you have observed the interaction between the client and the animal. So significant time spent in assessment, evaluation of the person and the animal in order to determine this is the best treatment option for the person, or at least will not interfere with recommended treatment options. And don't be afraid to file bogus complaints with licensing authorities if the ESA letter appears to be bogus, but was signed by someone with a license. So the pushback comes from telling the person who made the reasonable accommodation request, I must write to the person who wrote this letter. I will send them an email, I will send them a letter, whatever, and ask them for their credentials, their training and experience in this field, the total time they spent in assessment of you and evaluation of you and how you interact with this animal, and then I will make a determination about your reasonable accommodation request. That's what you do. Thank you for watching this. This is Denise Evans, Butler Evans Real Estate. If you need to reach me, my cell number is 205-310-3799. My email address is denise@butlerevansrealestate.com.